you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
A good-sized man or something. It looks like a man.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was.
Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Tia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
Son of a bitch is about 6'9".
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big, real big person.
But it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big.
Hello, folks. Give me just a second here to finish getting set up. Tonight we're going to be talking to Mark Zaskey from Crypto Reality down in West Palm Beach area. And just a second here. Can you hear me, Mark?
Yeah, you're coming through fine.
All right, Mark. We're live now. Go ahead and why don't you start off by telling me, back in the very beginning, how did you get into this whole Bigfoot thing?
Well, I'm from Ohio. My uncles told me the first thing I've ever heard of. They were hunters, and there were people in our neighborhood that hunted deer, but they hunted in Pennsylvania. I'm from Youngstown, and they hunted up in the mountains in Pennsylvania. And, they brought back, they used to scare us. So that was the first time I ever heard. I'm like everybody else. I watch TV, and In Search of got me. Anything with like Leonard Neat on it, I used to watch that stuff. But it didn't actually register as something that was actually a possibility to having anything to do with me until we moved to Florida in, I think, 1980. And we moved to an equestrian exposed right off the bat. I actually had interaction with police officers first week that I moved to the state of Florida involving Sasquatch, or what they would describe now. I know Sasquatch, they just call it a giant hairy monster that was attacking horses. So from there, that really freaked me out. It was like not on television anymore. And so that's how it all began. I had my first eyewitness interview with my best friend and his mother when I was 15. I'm like everybody else. It's not something that normally crosses your consciousness till you're in a realm that has something to do with somewhere that it actually becomes possible. There were all kinds of reports. It was a regular occurrence down here in Palm Beach County in the 70s and 80s. And we would hear things probably 3 or 4 times a year, somewhere in that nature. And, it was kind of common, and with us always out in these, wilderness areas. Palm Beach County was largely undeveloped in the early 80s in the western part of it. And so it was something you heard about. But it wasn't until about 2000, somewhere in the year 2000, 2001, that it was when the internet first started to catch on. That's really when it peaked. And there's a report that my brother found from here in the Everglades out on I-75 with the state trooper that pulled up on a car that was being demolished by a Sasquatch with an elderly gentleman inside of it. And he had hit the thing as it was crossing the road. And the police officer unloaded on this thing, and it just took off. And so once that happened, and I realized that, like, here it is, the millennium has already happened, and this is still going on. So that's when it really started to sink in that, look, man, this is like really happening. And it just fascinated me. So that's how I really got started in 2000, 2001. And of course, in 2001, the whole world was distracted with what happened in New York City. So it took me a few more years to get back on track with what I was interested in. And it was really just a hobby at that point. In 2005, I was planning expeditions and just about ready to start executing expeditions here in Palm Beach County in South Florida. And I was hit with something else. Somebody knew that I was into this kind of thing, and they had footage of an unknown marine mammal. And I took a look at it, and I've been fishing the mangroves here in South Florida my entire life down here. And what was on the film was not a manatee. It was clearly some type of a seal, but I'd never seen this type of seal. So I got sidetracked into that investigation for about 2 years, and it eventually got made into a Monster Quest episode with a lot of work on my behalf. You know what I mean? And then I got back into the Sasquatch thing, and it took a few years scouring reports, listening to shows like yours, Rick. And they were few and far between back then. It was mid 2000s, 2008, 2009, something like that. It was just starting to kind of hit and pick up speed, and the Travel Channel was putting out shows. And so I'm like everybody else, I just had the added benefit of hearing about it a lot down here in Palm Beach County.
Yeah, I'd never heard that story about the guy's car getting demolished like that down there. I lived down there since 1984, up until about 10 years ago. I moved up here to Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never heard that story. That's interesting. What happened? Did a guy get killed?
No. What happened was, and this is the way it was worded, and I actually read the police report, the affidavit from the witness and the officer, because as you know, anytime they discharge their firearm, they're required to fill out a report on it. And this guy was like, my brother actually sent me a copy of the report. And this is going back a ways. I don't have the report anymore. Something else I think it was a book called Strange Florida, actually mentioned the report. I don't know that there was a copy in it, but I did read the account besides the actual affidavits that I read. But this sign, one by the officer, and his account of what happened from his angle. He was driving along right about dusk, and people had their lights on, and he saw taillights pulled over on the side of the road. I think he was heading west, which technically means south on I-75 in the Everglades. Even though you're heading west, it says south. And you're heading actually towards Naples, and that's basically where you end up if you're on I-75. You end up over in that area. And so anyway, he saw the taillights, and as he approached the scene, he could see this commotion going on, and he pulled up, hit the spotlight, and here's this thing with its huge, 8 foot plus maybe. And so anyway, it was shaking the car violently, and this elderly gentleman had a death grip on the steering wheel, and he got out and just basically pulled his weapon, and I'm sure he gave it some instructions, but he opened fire on it. Was the gist of the actual affidavit that I read, and according to the police officer, it bounded off on the south side of the road. I believe it could have been the north side, because it's been a long time. It's been 16 years since I actually read that. But anyway, it bounded off into the swamp, and he then described the condition of the old guy in the car. Said he had a death grip on the steering wheel, and he was in a complete state of shock. Obviously, both of them were, but the witness, the actually elderly gentleman, filled it out. He said he was driving along and he hit the thing, and it freaked out on him and started tearing apart, pounding on it. And obviously, that's something that it would definitely put you in a state of shock. Something like a giant Sasquatch crossing the road is enough to do that. I imagine hitting it or basically just kind of veering to try to miss it and hitting it, which is what I gathered from the report. But apparently this thing threw a fit. So that was what triggered me. Really, what triggered me back into having this in focus.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'll have to look up that story. So tell us about your very first encounter.
My first encounter, technically, my first encounter was in early 2012, and we had done a loop, basically the turnpike loop, and it's something that if you're a researcher in Florida, I highly recommend. You just jump on the turnpike anywhere and just stay on it, and it turns into I-75. So you end up basically doing the I-75 loop, and it just takes you on a big circle around the state of Florida, the West Coast, in the South, up the East Coast, and then into Central Florida. And it was camping trip. We spent quite a while doing that. And we ended up going to like 7 different places and camping. And I got really interested with the park rangers that I was talking to when we stopped at various places. There were, Mayaka was one of them especially. And we actually heard of a pig being killed by something huge while we were there. And so, I had a lot of stuff that had influenced my interest in the subject as a kid, but putting stock in it as an adult's a different story. And I always loved camping and fishing, especially. I'm a big bass fisherman, and so that was like a huge thing for me. So wherever we went, my focus was really on fishing, and then I would kind of, whoever I was with, I'd kind of try to avoid, talking with them about it, and kind of like look into it on my own while I was in the park, talk to people, officials, and so on. And what I noticed in doing that, particularly on that trip, was that people were trying to avoid talking about it, officials. And so anyway, long story short, 2012, I really started to get it up to where I was going to start investigating this in the physical world. I was going to get into reality about it and put some time in out interviewing people, traveling around, where were the sightings, and I would go there, So I started looking up sightings, and I found one in Palm Beach County, which really shocked me. And so I went to the place, and I went right to the front desk and was talking with a ranger about it. And she's like, we don't know about this. And I'm like, well, is anybody around that would? And so an FWC officer was in the area, and he came over. And it wasn't him attempting to answer my questions. It was harassment. This guy was trying to harass me. He was asking me questions. It was completely different than what I assumed it would be, which was, hey, I have a question for you. It was very relaxed the way I asked. And it was instantly, well, who are you? And why are you, what is this all about? It was like, I'm being accosted over asking this question. So right off the bat, my job, I had dealt with a lot of different people and types of people, and I'd become used to interviewing people at that point. And I had a very, my job was social oriented. I'll just put it that way. And so I knew this guy. I was like, there's something going on with these people, And then they tried saying, well, if you're going to be in this park researching, you need to pull permits and all this stuff. And they were trying to dissuade me, was what I got the feeling. So I ended up, it was kind of a pissy conversation is the way I put it. Anyway, I left, and it's funny because when I was leaving, I was driving down North Lake Boulevard, and I was heading east out of the Grassy Waters Preserve, which is where I had interviewed these people, or actually was trying to. And I saw a 20-foot palm trunk laying on the side of the barbed wire fence that I actually built in the early 90s. I worked for a fence company, and I built this fence that was 9 miles on the side of North Lake Boulevard. And they had asked us at that point, they were setting up preserves, and they had asked us to put the barbed wire facing in. And we remarked, we had already put a bunch of it up. Like, it's not supposed to go in. It faces out to keep people out. No. We want you to put it in. And, that's just what it is. So we had to change a bunch of it. But anyway, this barbed wire, there was this palm laying, this trunk of this palm tree lying on the top of this fence, and it was smashed down a good 3.5 feet. Now, this is an 8-foot fence plus the 36 to 48 inches that we had to sink it in the ground years before. So I made a U-turn and pulled over, and I was checking it out, and there were no palm trees. There was no hammock anywhere nearby, and there were drag marks where something had dragged this palm tree from a tree line that was a good 100 and so yards away. I mean, it was probably a little more than that. It was 140, 150 yards away. And you could see it gouge, big gouge. And so I started, I'm looking at the top of the palm tree, and it looked like it was worn, where something was, basically getting out of there. And so that triggered me to start looking for a way in, because I wanted to, check out where this palm tree was dragged from. So I started driving on the road. I ended up pulling over in the closest point that I could find to where that tree was, and there was a canal. Long story short, I walked down this bank about, 275 to 300 yards maybe. And I had my fishing pole, and I was acting like I was fishing. There was a fence. Now, this is the edge of the preserve, and there's a barbed wire fence at my back. And I'm walking, and I'm fishing this canal that's in front of me. And I'm glancing back, looking, because I'm seeing, is there a gate maybe or something? I can get into this, back way, because I needed to get back west to get to that tree. So I'm walking along, and then all of a sudden I came up on this huge rock, and it had snails and freshwater mussels crushed all over it. And I was looking, and I'm thinking, this is kind of odd, but we do have otters. So that was the first thing that came to my mind. Then I saw another rock that was a little bigger than a softball, and it had the oysters and the mussel shells crushed all over the bottom of it. And it was laying there. So I started looking, and the next thing you know, I'm seeing where there are weeds pulled out on the canal bank. And there were two very clear 16-inch tracks underwater, under about 12 inches of water, and just foot-shaped impressions is the way I'll put it. Under 12 inches of water, that's all you're going to get. And I glanced up the bank, and there was another one at the top of the bank, which was approximately 8 feet. Now, it was probably a 35 to 40 degree incline. It wasn't a real steep one, but it was clear that there was a big track there, or an impression at this point. So I started looking, at what was going on, and I'm thinking, somebody's like eating these things here, man, and they got big feet, and I just couldn't buy it really, but I'm the type of guy that I'm going to follow up. So I walked up the top of the bank and looked across, and about 30 feet away, the barbed wire fence was pulled down all the way to the ground, and the poles were bent all the way to the ground. So I'm looking, and there's some real tall grass. So I walk across, and I'm looking for tracks. I didn't see any. I come up to the fence, and I step inside, and immediately there was another huge track. And the grass was, this is the grass that I'm standing on at 200 and something pounds at that point. I think I was 205. And it didn't leave anything, no track. And this is a very clear impression. It's a good inch down. And it's, it looked honestly like someone had a flipper on their foot. Not that it had webbed feet, but just the general shape of a flipper. It had these, it just came up like a V, and it was strange. But so anyway, I looked ahead of me, and about 15 feet ahead of me, there was a wall of impenetrable brush, and there was a huge tunnel. And I started looking, and I approached it. No more tracks as I'm walking up. And I get to the mouth of this thing, and I'm looking, and all these branches are broke. And I can see that this has been manipulated, this tunnel. And it went back like 20 or 30 feet, and it took a left, and I couldn't see around the corner. And I'm thinking, am I doing this, So anyway, I went in. I got in a ways, and I saw a couple more tracks and some mud under this banyan tree. And there was a huge canopy over my head with vines. And I let out 3 loud yells. And through the thick brush on the other side of this banyan tree, about 30 feet from my position, somebody moaned. And they very clearly, in a frustrated moan, they went, "Oh."
No, I thought maybe it was a
female
Squatch.
I don't. No, 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 no. It was a man, and it was a big man, and I heard him stand up, but I still couldn't see anything. Now at this point, I'm alone. I'm freaking out, and I don't know what I'm going to do here. I just know that there's somebody here with me, and it didn't sound like a little guy. And here I'm got the tracks, and I'm thinking, this is the individual. Could this be what I think it is? Is what I'm thinking. And then I did three yells, and this guy mimicked my exact three yells. I mean, exactly, but in this giant voice. And on the third one, he added a notation of sarcasm that literally embarrassed me. It made me feel like I woke the guy up and he was pissed because I did that. And that's exactly the way it felt. And then all hell broke loose in that bush. And I turned and ran and fell. And a lot of, I got cut up and it was bad. I fell 3 or 4 times and was screaming guttural sounds like as I was around. I'll never forget this. And he must have went in the other direction, but it sounded like a football team was going in the other direction. And I ran all the way out that tunnel. I fell 2 or 3 times, and then I got out to the road, ran past my fishing pole, completely disregarded that I didn't even think about it. Turned right, ran all the way to the car, slid across my hood, and was on the other side of my car, peeking over the car. And then there was like a whoa, and a semi went driving by. And it took me a good minute or so to process what happened, and all kinds of things were running through my head. First of all, what yelled at me, I'd never been yelled at like that in my entire life. It was actually intelligent, first of all, but it wasn't a man, like a regular man. It went through me like a train, like it just went through me, and it vibrated my organs. And this guy was 30 feet from me. I can remember thinking that I was still in bed. This isn't happening. I can remember thinking all kinds of things. And then when I realized, okay, you know what, man, I'm like almost having a heart attack, right? At that time I was still smoking. I was a smoker. So I was, 2 packs a day for a long time. And so, first of all, I thought I was going to die from that. That was going on too. And the bottom line is like, this just happened. And not only that, but it just happened after I got hassled asking about it. So my reaction right then was I got pissed because I knew something was up, and that was not a homeless guy or, a regular person. Like, I'm a person and I know regular people and I know regular people behavior and where's common sense in all this? You know what I mean? I get that a lot. I get those comments and questions because I deal with the general public a lot. The bottom line is like, you have common sense and so do we. So do I. I'm an eyewitness now after that. I didn't see the individual. And that set me on a very pointed and purposeful mission. And that's why that right there, that encounter, that's why we're sitting here right now, Rick.
Interesting. I had heard your interview on Sasquatch Chronicles, and you had talked about something that happened in the cabbage squatch or not cabbage squatch, cabbage palms.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a multiple eyewitness at this point, but most of the stuff that I've seen is most of the guys I've seen, the individuals are from our research in the last 3 years. But the first one I saw is why it's probably the reason why I pursue the direction that we've pursued with our research, that they're natural. Because after that incident in 2012, I went to Mayaka in late 2012. Actually, August 18th, I arrived with my son, and he had an encounter, and in fact did see one. And I was like, what, just listening to what he said to me, and I was right there, man. You know how these things happen. If you know anything about this stuff, it's seconds, and it's just who they are. It's what they are. They're not about hanging out and having tea. You know what I mean? They're indifferent. That's what they are. They're indifferent to us. And the bottom line is he described natural behavior. And what I experienced up to that point was natural behavior. And I had found tracks, which are natural things to find when something walks on the ground. And so in my mind, logic is the way I was going to approach all this stuff. And what I saw in 2013, in September of 2013, ended all of my supernatural thinking, because up until then I'd been exposed to a lot of information like everybody else, and people saying a lot of different things about what they witnessed, these supernatural abilities. And I don't mean to contradict what eyewitnesses have said. What I can say is I have not witnessed anything supernatural from the beginning. And what we've caught on film is not supernatural. And what I saw in September 2013 was an individual with very dense bones and a musculature that would naturally support the physical ability that I witnessed. And it's that simple. And this dude covered a 20-foot trail and was in the air coming down as he covered it. So he jumped 5 to 8 feet from outside that trail that I was on. And that may sound ridiculous to some individuals, or most individuals. But the reality is, and this is the way I always describe it, if you take the greatest running back in history, Barry Sanders, that's my opinion anyway. Everybody's got their favorite. But Barry could do things that most men in the NFL couldn't do or ever could do. And he could jump to the left. He could plant his foot and bound 7 to 8 feet. This is a little guy, man. He could burst speed through holes. All this, but he was a physical specimen. These guys are physical specimens, and what I saw was the greatest representation to this day of a physical human specimen that I'd ever seen. And I don't know, that it will ever be topped. I mean, I saw his whole body. That's what it is. He jumped a trail. He interacted with physical reality. He landed. Then he interacted with my physical reality. He heard me. He heard us. And he turned, pulled down the palm frond, and he looked at me. And that set me on a path that was different, because I still, at the point where I had the guy yell at me, I wasn't sure what they were, or what they were capable of. But when that happened, so when we approached our research, man, it was no nonsense. Like, look, we're going to forget everything we've heard, and we're going to go off what the data says we're studying.
Just to make it clear for the people listening, you're talking about two different encounters, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the first one you only
auditory,
heard it, right? And then
one was auditory, and the second one was visual. Would you like me to describe the individual?
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you do a little bit? I mean, you don't have to go into all the,
okay,
swamp buggy and all that stuff.
Okay, right. We've caught many individuals on film, and I'm yet to see an individual that looks like this guy, except when we caught this individual on film. And it's him. It is what it is. He was not the typical Sasquatch that people describe. He was all in gray hair. It was 7 to 10, some places 12 inches long. It was a mop of human gray hair, silver gray, wolf-colored hair, like that silver, shiny, wolf-colored hair. And it looked healthy. And it looked like he had like a rock star hairdo, man. It came up and it was like frizzy on top, looked like, you know what I mean? But it was long, and it was all the same length, and it was mopped in his face. But it looked nice, actually. Like it would, it had some oil shine on it, obviously. And it looked also like in places it was wet. He also had a shoulder pad on each side of very thick gray hair, silver hair. And The shoulder muscles bulged out under it. His chest muscles were enormous. He was not tree trunk thick across the midsection. He was cut like a V. He looked like the most incredible human specimen I've ever seen. He was every muscle group shown in this individual's body. He had very thin hair across his midsection. His crotch had thick hair on it. It was very thin across his thighs and his hamstrings. On his back, you could see that at the base of his spine, where his gluteus maximus jutted out, and it did jut out, there was a huge tuft of hair. And both of his muscles, his glutes, had thin hair on it. But running down his crack, so to speak, he had very thick hair. The hair thickened below the knees, and as it reached mid-shin, it got super thick, and you could not see the feet. You could not see the hands. The biceps were visible in thin hair, and the forearms had a thick, thick hair, just like the shoulders, and it hung past his hands. I called him an albino at the time because I wasn't aware that most of them are achromatically colored between white and black in that gray area. That pretty much covers most of them that we study. This guy was achromatic, but I said he was an albino. When he landed, I mean, I saw everything, man. His muscles reacted to the landing, and he basically landed like you would sneak land on somebody behind them so that they didn't hear you, so you could tap them and freak them out. Like, he just did it gingerly, and he was going way too fast to do that. There was no possible way that what I was seeing was real, and that's exactly what I was thinking. And a bunch of other stuff too. You know, I don't know if you were an eyewitness, but a bunch of things run through your head in a very short amount of time. And then when he landed, his whole entire upper body, his waist stayed pointing north. His whole entire upper body turned about 45 degrees before his feet shifted. And then he pulled down the palm frond, and I could see his lower body fine, man. And I could see half, like, you know, a little bit of his shoulder was sticking out. Then he pulled down the palm fronds, and he leaned out, and the hair on his face parted as he leaned, and he stared at me. And he looked like a caveman, and that's exactly that's all I can say. He looked like an exaggerated bone structure, human type, you know, relic hominoid. At the time, I said, my mind went, that's a, you know, effing caveman, you know? Mm-hmm. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, you know? And if it wasn't for the fact that he actually acknowledged our presence, I probably wouldn't have believed what I saw and would never even said anything to anybody. But when he stopped and acknowledged it and then pulled the palm frond down, I knew I was seeing what I was seeing. And it was like, whoa, dude, you know what I mean? And then, you know, I was like, turn the camera on, because he had a camera with him, the guy I was with. And I was pulling on his waist strap, whatever. You know, the bottom line was he was distracted with his knapsack, like, you know, clumsy human. And so I was like, there it is. Oh, my God. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe I was seeing it. When we looked up, the palm fronds were all whoosh, moving, and he was gone, man. And we found a couple tracks when we went looking, you know, right up there.
So let me ask you, you said his the area of his junk was, he needed to do some manscaping. Were you able to see his junk at all or not?
No, but it was a man. I could see his chest perfectly, and I could see his 24-pack. Dude was built. I'm talking about built. Obliques showing like you wouldn't believe. And in hindsight, now that I've conducted a good amount of research, I would say that this individual was probably getting most of his hydration from plant life, and he was dehydrated.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, and he looked like it. Like, he looked like, you know how, like, you know, bodybuilders will train real hard and bulk up, and then the last 2 weeks they dehydrate, and then they get that super cut look,
right? And
it's striation. This is homeboy, right? This is what he looked like, striated, but he wasn't thick in the core, and that's the one thing that was different. You know, I've seen individuals in our research area that were thick in the core. My son saw a Sasquatch that had a redwood-sized trunk, man. You know what I mean? It was just like, it didn't look like a V. It looked like, you know, straight down from the armpits to the waist. You know what I mean?
More like Patty.
Oh, exactly. No, the exact thing. Yeah, but bigger. My son saw one that was between 8 and 10 feet tall, and it closer to 10. You know what I mean? The surrounding bush was 5 to 6 feet. That's what I say, and it was 4 feet above the bush. So that was in Myakka.
That's interesting.
The individuals that I've seen in, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Most people say that the skunk apes, the ones in Florida, are actually smaller than Patty in that, but it sounds like you're saying that all the ones you've encountered have been, what, 8 feet at least?
The guy I saw was probably 7 to 7.5 feet tall. I don't believe he was 8 feet. He may have been a little bigger than 7.5 feet. I look at it and I say, okay, I know one of the things that it's like I'm like everybody else, man. I'm a pretty good judge because I'm an observationist. That's what I do. First of all, my job was observing people and then helping them. That's what I did. You know what I mean? So I'm an observationist plus my military. You know what I mean? I observe. That's what I did. I've been observant my whole life. I'm a fisherman. If you're not observant, you suck at fishing. That's the bottom line. And I don't. Okay, I took it to the professional level. My brother's still a professional fisherman. It runs in the family. I can tell you the guy was close to 7.5 feet, possibly an inch or two over. He was not 8 feet, the guy I saw. The ones that I've seen in my research area, I've seen the same one twice, and then I've seen one. At this point, I've had 9. 1, 2, 3 juveniles, and the other ones were fully grown, and they were huge. And Melanie, my wife, has seen one that was probably a subadult, 48 inches at the shoulders. At this point, what we're catching on film and what we've witnessed, I disagree with the old Florida's got small ones. Like, we're dealing with Sasquatch. It's the same species the country over. Now, I will agree with the fact that obviously, like anybody else, brachiating up mountains will develop more musculature than living in a swamp. You know what I mean? And so you're going to see a much bulkier individual in the Pacific Northwest, and I've experienced that firsthand interviewing eyewitnesses. But down here, they do get big. They're thinner. So I'll say that. And that's based on what I've seen and what our data and our film shows. And the tracks too. We see a high degree of emaciation in the tracks, particularly in the juveniles.
What are your thoughts on that? There's one skunk ape photo that's been out there for forever that looks like an orangutan. What's your opinion of that thing?
Well, I've said this before. I'm like everybody else. I can tell you this: the soft tissue variations that we see are incredible. I'm looking at your profile picture right now on Skype, Rick, and I've got 10 different individuals in my research area that look like that. But there are also individuals that look like the Myakka skunk ape photo. I can't say if that's valid. We've got primate, lesser, I'll put it that way, lesser primate looking Sasquatch. Some of them have a very gorilla look to them, and they're very scary. Their nostrils are, like, if you're going to judge some of them, what I say is I look at my own and I look at most humans, and for the most part, most humans' nostrils will even up with either the corner of their eyes or just before the retina. The Sasquatch that we have in our areas, their eyes are far apart because they're huge, and their nostrils literally line up with the center of their pupil. So you get variations now. I'm talking about, I've seen individuals that have my nose. They look just like me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like I'm talking about the nose now. They don't look like me, but they have a human nose, and you're looking at this thing. And then there are other ones that have extreme primate features. Well, I wouldn't say extreme. What I would say is they have orangutan features. They have chimpanzee features. Now, when we started all this, I used to disagree with that it was impossible. That's impossible. They're human. They look human because that's what I saw in my sighting. This dude looked human. Right. He just looked like a caveman. He did not look like a primate. The only thing primate on this guy, and it's just a comparison, is the fact he was hairy on his body more than like most people. You know what I mean? Right. I have some hairy individuals in my family, but this guy topped that You know what I mean? The bottom line is what we're seeing now is in the soft tissue variation. Obviously, the explanation for that is there's some interesting genetics going on. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that they can look just as different as people can. I mean, look at Andre the Giant.
Mhm. Oh man, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you have everything from Andre the Giant to Justin Bieber, for crying out loud, you know?
Right? Yeah. No, I make that comparison all the time in my films, and I think that's a really great description that you just gave. Comparison. That's probably the best one. But at the same time, I just looked at one today, and I'm going to be releasing this film to our members and some of it on YouTube here, probably tomorrow afternoon. And we got some clear footage on this guy, and or girl. I think it's a female. She has a very primate looking face. I mean, it appears it appears more like a chimp. That's all I can say. I mean, and we see that. I see that. The distance between the bottom of the nose and the upper lip, it's twice that of a human,
Right.
typically. Not that they can't have something different, because the one I saw had a good upper lip on him, but it wasn't what I see in some of my research. You know what I mean? Like, so that's what I mean. I think when I'm talking about more of a primate look to him, it's more of a chimp look. And I didn't think that was possible. I'll be honest with you, man. I heard people describe that, and I honestly didn't believe those people because of what I saw. You know what I mean? So I had that bias. And I've learned that, over time researching, man, at this point, when people describe a Sasquatch, first of all, as well as I do, either they saw it or they didn't. There's no way I can confirm that. I can do the best I can. I mean, I interviewed so many people, but they say things that are consistent. And what I've learned is that some of these people that are saying things that are inconsistent could be telling the truth, because there's some there are inconsistencies in this soft tissue that, every once in a while you see one and you go, what am I staring at? You know what I mean? And it's obviously there. It's looking at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for the most part, that profile shot you've got on Skype here that I'm staring at, that's most of them right there. That appears to be a young male, actually.
That's the one I saw.
Subadult. Man, was he fully grown?
I don't believe so. I believe he was probably adolescent kind of thing.
Like a subadult.
Yeah, he was looking.
Teenager.
He was looking in the window at me and my cousins while we were sitting there talking
brother,
and laughing.
See, I'm glad I don't have that situation. I couldn't deal with it.
Well,
Living with him?
Huh? Yeah, I looked at him for probably a minute to 2 minutes while he was staring at my cousin Teresa.
God.
And I was trying to figure out who the hell it was. I thought it was one of my uncles or something that was trying to scare us or something. I was getting ready to yell at him, and it looked right at me, and I went, oh, that's not... That's when I suddenly realized that, no, this is something else.
Let me ask you a question. How long did you take to get this render right? Is it right?
It's pretty accurate. I used to be much better,
but
I've got a nerve problem. That's about the way it was, the angle it looked at me when it first noticed that I was looking at it. It was because its head was towards my cousin Teresa, who was to my right. And then it suddenly, I guess she must have looked at me, and because he was staring at her the whole time. And then all of a sudden his eyes just went over to me. And she must have looked at me, and he went to look what she was looking at and realized I was staring at him. And then he very slowly, and this is the way I describe it. When a dog is protecting a bone and you're playing with it, and its head moves very slowly, almost imperceptibly, like it's going to, it's waiting for you to reach for the bone. That's what it did. Its head very slowly started turning towards me. And I was like, oh, this is an animal. This is not a human being, So I did it in a 3D rendering program. I did the thing. I did a better one on my
Well, you did a damn good job. I'll tell you what, man, because I've caught that guy on film many times.
You should see my Wanted Dead or Alive one. That's a much better image, yeah. But
okay. Well, I'll have to check all that out,
I'd like to do a little bit more texturing on the face, because the face isn't exactly accurate. One of the things I noted that I was able to see when I was staring at him is that what I found odd was that its wrinkles went vertically instead of horizontally. You know how people's wrinkles, you get crow's feet and they kind of go to the sides? Well, this thing had wrinkles going up and down. And if you ever seen like a chimp or whatever, they have those fine lines in their upper lip. Yeah, this thing had I could see the fine lines in its upper lip and everything. And that's in the picture, but it's real hard to see. I need to work on that texture a bit. But I've got a nerve issue where my hands shake, so I can't do that stuff much anymore. So I got it good enough. I said, hey, if you see this, it's a Sasquatch. That's kind of
I agree with you on that. This actually looks very similar to the juvenile that was standing at our drop point and had just basically finger swiped almost the entire jar of peanut butter and left it right there with the lid up, the lid sitting right next to it and the jar sitting there. The finger swipes are all in it. You know, he's just saliva all in that jar. But I looked over and this guy with that little bit of bronze tone was standing, and his head and part of his shoulders it just almost looks exactly like him. You know, he was a little more bronze, a little more exaggerated, like dehydrated looking. Mm-hmm. And he had a little bit more glow because there were shafts hitting him. And it took me a second to comprehend what I was staring at, but then I realized what it was. And I was like, oh, and it was like the second I realized it and he saw me realize that he floated off. You know, he just kind of turned slowly, just like you just said.
Yeah.
He never took his eyes off me as he turned.
It's creepy.
Until his head turned. It was like his whole upper body, like, you know, oh man. And but you know, he was on a 45-degree incline, and when he floated off, it almost didn't seem real. And then when we ran over there, of course we could hear him, Bush, Bush, Bush. And, you know, we played cat and mouse with him, Mel and me, for about 45 minutes trying to get him to, you know, just get a good shot of him. I mean, it was like, you know, I wanted that shot on film. And then we realized when we got over there that, you know, this guy was eating the peanut butter. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like unscrewed, and it's sitting there like I unscrewed it and sat there on this rock and started eating it. So we, you know, we closed it up, bagged it up, and, you know, it's in the freezer, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is your, let me, we got a little more than 10 minutes left. What is your opinion on this? I understand that you know that something's going on as far as them isolating areas for. Actually, why don't you talk about that? I mean, what I disagree with everybody talking about this Men in Black crap and all of that stuff. But why don't you talk about what's going on as far as them secretly making like little preserves or whatever for Bigfoot? You had mentioned it when we.
Oh, when you say you disagree with the Men in Black thing, you mean you don't think they exist?
No, well. Not in the way.
Or let me put a finer point on it. You don't think they interact over the Bigfoot thing?
No, I don't think that they're out there threatening people the way that they're talking, the way everyone puts it out there.
That's interesting that you say that, because I don't either.
Yeah.
Because trust me when I tell you, if there was going to be a guy that was going to be hassled over it, it would have been me.
Mm-hmm.
And I ain't had nobody knock on my door. And the only people that have stopped me in my research area are the FWC when I used the wrong entrance. And trust me when I tell you, I got more footage of these damn things than anybody I'm aware of, even if you disagree with it. The bottom line is I read a document about 3 years ago, and whether it's real or not, I'm not here to argue about with anybody. I don't argue about it with anybody. The Miller document says some very specific things about preserves being set up. And in fact, I helped set up a few of these by putting fence around them here in Palm Beach County in the timeline that it says they're going to be set up. And in the last 3 years, we recorded Sasquatch in these preserves. And they're called Pittman Robertson Federal Aid Natural Areas. In every single one of these places, we have caught these individuals on film, or we found the signatures, including tracks. Not one of these have we visited that we haven't found tracks or recorded these individuals on film. And I think that I think that we would all be remiss, and this is just my opinion based on research in the field. We would be remiss if we thought for a second that something this consistent that's been reported for basically 2,000 years with Native American oral tradition, cave drawings, going back even further, every tribe, we would be remiss to think that the U.S. government has not looked into this and has not attempted to manage this situation.
Oh, I agree.
And
Actually, there's somebody put a comment up here that I'll go ahead and bring up because it's kind of pertinent here. And I wanted to ask you if you know of any disappearing children around there that could be chalked up to a Bigfoot taking them.
Not children, but in 2015, we went into our research area and we were just leaving the car and there were game wardens speeding around everywhere. I stopped one of these individuals and I said, "What is going on with you guys today, man? This is like unprecedented." And he's like, "Well, we got missing people." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, 2 campers in 2 days, 2 different campsites, gone. And these guys were around, man. Okay. Now we researched at that time almost every day. And we went into an area that we already knew was full of Sasquatch. And you talk about freaking out. But the bottom line is they found one guy. They won't say how he died. None of it was televised, first of all. And I asked this individual, are the feds here yet? And he's like looking at me and I'm like, was it the Harry Scaries? And he's looking at me and he goes, You mean let me think how he worded it. He said, "You mean," damn, I can't think of how he said it. "You mean it's just killing me," because he said he knew is what it was. He knew. He said, "You mean the mystery apes?" That's what he said. He said, "You mean the mystery apes?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "We have people on this." And I'm like, "Okay." And he drove off. But that's what he said. I said, because, feds, missing people. So, and really, not enough time had passed for them to be involved. But I knew at some point they were going to. And sure enough, they shut that whole area down where those campers were missing. We drove by. They didn't shut our research area down. But the actual entrance, they were not. They had a big white, plastic white, thing across the entrance. We drove past to go in, and I'm like looking, and I didn't say anything. We drove past it, but the bottom line is they never found the other guy. 2 guys in 2 days from 2 different campsites came up missing, and that was probably within, I don't know, 1,000 yards or so where we were at.
And
I don't honestly think that the individuals that were studying did it, but
do you think it's possible that Bigfoot are taking and eating people?
Yeah, man, I think that people are taking and eating people in certain countries, in certain situations. So absolutely 100%. And the reason I say that is I've seen one. They're real. I know they're real. I don't care what anybody says. They're out there. They're running around. And if there's one, there's a lot of them because they had to come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And we're documenting family groups. And I can tell you that when humans are put in situations that are extreme and they are starving, they will consume other humans. And that's a fact. It's been documented throughout history, modern human history. If you think for a second a primitive creature like a Sasquatch will not consume your ass if they're hungry, you're sadly mistaken.
Yeah, look at the
That's
Donner
my opinion.
Party.
I'm not saying they roam around and you're on their diet. In certain regions, maybe that's possible. American Indians very clearly had oral tradition regarding certain types of these guys that were from certain regions. Maybe the food source was a little more scarce and they were on the menu. It sounds like it. But where we're researching, they could have killed us 300 times. And the only time that they approach us in any type of an aggressive way is really to push me off, because several times I was overly aggressive trying to get them on film. And they object to that shit strenuously. You can believe that. Mm-hmm. And my thing is, I always say the same thing. If you want to know if a Sasquatch is natural, keep pushing. Keep pushing. Know what I mean?
Yeah.
I got news for you. It ain't going to jump in a portal. It's going to come right at you, and you'll see how natural it is.
Hey, have you seen any females up close enough to get a look at the genitalia?
No, I have seen in one of my films a breast, very clear, a breast. And not only that, but they seem to handle the family group the same way that we would. Physically adept, you need to be out hunting. You're having babies, you need to be home with the children.
Right.
And this is the way they handle it. And the bottom line is when we catch juveniles around, there's always seems to be another Sasquatch there that's larger, and it does tend to have softer features, or it appears to be old. And I saw an individual that looked like it was going to die any second. It was a gray Sasquatch. It was about 4.5 feet tall, and it was so emaciated, it looked like it had a disease. And it was probably one of the sorriest, most horrible things I've ever watched. He was looking at me like, please give me some food. You know what I mean? And this is in the research area. And Melanie was standing next to me. I'm like, are you looking at this thing? And she's like, I can't see it. She's about a foot shorter than me. And I said, hold your iPad up and angle it towards the ground. And we got him on film. It's literally disgusting. But in that footage, there's a female behind him. Now, I don't know, for sure that it was a female. I can't, I say it was a female behind him. The bottom line is I'm making an assumption because there are a lot of young around, these bigger ones that have softer features. The males look like that profile picture that you have, but way bigger, and their features are more exaggerated. They look beastly scary. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reason I'm asking, and this is just in case you do get an opportunity, is in one of my other shows I talk about the actually, what was it? I think it was in the one about Albert Ostman, where I talked about the female genitalia and how it's a fact that human females are the only primates that have labia majora. And it would be very interesting. Yeah, it'd be very interesting to find out, because Albert Ostman described the female as not having breasts yet. And I found it interesting that he didn't mention that she had an odd looking piece of equipment, if you know what I mean. Because it would be,
right.
be more like a chimpanzee or something. And he would have said, well, it was really odd or something like that, But since he didn't, I'm wondering if he didn't because she looked like a human female there. And if that's the case, that to me just is another nail in the coffin, that these things are a lot more closely related to humans than people are thinking that they are. Because humans are the only ones that have breasts and keep them. Usually chimps and them, they'll grow breasts while they're breastfeeding and that, but then they go away.
Okay. Yeah. I can tell you this, and this is what I base their humanity on. And I look at it and I say, well, most of the ones that we can really tell from the footage, they all, not most of them, all of them have a hooded nose. Some of them do have a more gorilla type nose, but it does have a hood. Mm-hmm. It's defined. It's a hood on the nose. That's submerged. They can go in the water. They do go in the water. I think I sent you some images, didn't I?
Nothing about water. No. Oh, you sent me. Actually, you sent me one where it just says Area 4 or something like that. There was no description.
Yeah, actually, I think I did send you one that has just the head sticking out of the water. It looks like, it's a big Sasquatch with his head sticking out of the water. You see, he's sitting under a big dead bush. But what we see on in the films is their emotional intelligence, and what we're seeing is that they're more like us in that they can govern their response and tailor it exactly to your push. Like if I push, they'll push back. If I don't push, they don't push at all. At all. And I mean at all. Like I've had branches thrown at me charging the bushes. Yeah, I was charging the bushes, screaming at the top of my lungs. In the beginning, I thought it was homeless people. I didn't buy it. I thought I saw that Sasquatch in 2013. I was, my brother and I found a track, and I said, well, he could have came this far. That's my opinion. I learn as I go, and I base everything I say on what we experience in the field and catch on our films and the data that we retrieve. I don't listen to what's going on out there at all. And Melanie will tell you the same thing.
Right.
You know, they want to call me a hardhead all the time. The bottom line is look, man, I'm not going off opinion. I'm not doing it. If you got data and you can show me, that's one thing. But all this opinion. So, you know, I get into it and I can tell you that they have a very high degree of emotional intelligence, self-discipline. And they have to hunt. And there's absolutely no way you're getting a deer to come by you if you can't shut up. That's the bottom line. So based on our research, the individuals that we study live in relative silence. And they live a relatively symbiotic existence in the areas that we live in. You can tell they've been in there for sure if you know what the signatures are. But they're not even the atypical signatures that you see around the country. Like these big stick, you know, all this stuff, you know. Their huts and all the stuff that they do make things. But it blends so much better. And I think why is because they've been living and coexisting in areas that we've developed for many decades. You've got 2 or 3 generations down here that have been living alongside people who've been developing these areas, and they're used to seeing us out there. They've advanced in their adaptations, these groups that we're studying. And it's extremely hard to catch them on film. 3 years, 300 plus expeditions. I've had 8 in this area, eyeball to eyeball. And I can tell you, it gets old not seeing them. You can hear them, you can smell them. They'll even throw stuff, but the bush is so thick and they rarely come out. They have an emotional intelligence. They're opportunistic. We bring food, they take advantage of it. They're a lot smarter than people give credit to, but I know a lot of that's instinctive. At the same time, there is definitely the only way you can tell is, you know, and this is what I don't recommend this to any researchers, but I mean, I did it because I didn't honestly believe they were Sasquatch. I ran at the bush. This thing was walking along and it stopped in a bush. It was walking next to us. I ran down in there and ran at that bush. And I was subsequently popped across my chest by a 3.5-foot branch from the other direction. It didn't even come from the bush that I was running at. There was an individual in that bush, and it was after dark, and I got drilled, knocked the camera out of my hands, knocked me 4 feet back. and I didn't even really realize where the bush came from because my adrenaline was above ridiculous at the time. I mean, you go running down in a hollow in the pitch black, and you don't know what you're dealing with, thinking it's homeless people, but it might not be, and there's several things moving in the bushes. You're freaking out, you know what I mean? And I was doing that, and then bam, I got drilled. It didn't even occur to me that I got hit until I got home and watched the film. And she was like, and even Melanie, when I got up to the road after I came out of those bushes, she said, there was something in the bush right here watching me. And that was behind my position. These individuals could have took me out at any time. Anytime, and they could have taken Melanie out on several occasions, and we have footage to back that up. I sent you a picture of a Sasquatch's eyeball from 6 feet away, and she was there by herself, and I was on the island trying to figure out what was shaking the trees at 60 feet, 1,000 yards away from her. They could have killed her instantly. What we see is a curiosity and a degree of indifference to not engage unless they're engaged. And that's the groups we study. Around the country, I'm sure that's different, Rick.
Yeah, well, my perspective and the reason that what I'm basically trying to get information on is that, see, if you try to put out there the argument that, well, they act human, and they'll say, well, you're just putting humanity onto them like you do with your dog, and so, and I don't think that's the case. I think if we can prove that they think like a human, that they have emotions like a human, that they have a family structure like humans do, that their physicality is like a human, then they have to be closer related to humans than everyone thinks that they are, which means that they have to be more sentient or a sentient being. They have to be, I think, my personal opinion, is that they are where we were when we were in caveman days. I think that's where they are now. I think that they're a sentient race and that they're evolving, but they're just farther behind us than, they're way back when we were in caveman days, And the way to prove that is...
Rick, I agree with everything you just said. Everything you just said. I couldn't agree more, and that's based on field research. I'm not trying to tell you I agree with you because I want to be on your show. I'm not telling you anything. I'm telling you I agree with you because that's what our data says. Every single aspect of the Sasquatch that you just described is what our data shows. And our physical experiences, more importantly. Like, I get the data because I'm conducting a study that eventually this data is going to be looked at. My experiences are what matter to me, and I can tell you that's what we experience. It's uncanny. I'll tell you what it does do. That all of this has forced Melanie and I to question our existence, because although the Sasquatch and they do live symbiotically, at the same time, what we're witnessing now is they're draining the resources of this area. I don't know how long it's going to last, what we got going, because the bottom line is when we first found this area, everything was abundant. Now it's nothing. There's nothing. There's nothing. And they're still there. I don't know whether our involvement in that has kept them there. The bottom line is it's a huge wildlife area, but this particular 3,000 square yards is where we have discovered the aspects of the Sasquatch that you just stated. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I agree with wholeheartedly that this species is the most single important discovery that mankind can have, an awareness that there are hominoids that could potentially help explain us or disprove certain theories, whatever way it goes. The bottom line is this is important. Mm-hmm. And we see this, so you definitely have a supporter for what you just said right here.
Oh,
I can tell you that.
Hey, why don't you go ahead? We're running over. Why don't you go ahead and tell people where they can find you and your information and your group and that, and we'll close. Sure. We have a YouTube channel called Crypto Reality. You can go there and watch some of our public releases. Typically, we don't do that. We're privately funded through a website called cryptoreality.us. Our members fund our work, and so if you're interested in learning more about us, you can go to the website, and we have a few public pages that you can check out. And it's very basic information on the public pages, and you can watch some of our videos. What you'll see is we're very serious about this, and you will see what we're telling you. You'll see in our films. That's bottom line. And like I said, the goal here for us is to improve public awareness on the importance of the issue, and we feel that if they can see that these guys have family groups, that if they can see that these guys take care of their family groups, if they can see the humanity in their faces, and we do catch a lot of faces. Most of what we do is get faces, and I always make a joke out of that. That's because their eyeballs are not in their elbow, and when they want to see something, they look with their faces, right? Right.
The bottom line is they're looking at us. So you'll see that. We've done a good job so far. It's always getting better with the with upgrades and equipment, and that's how it goes. Our members get first crack at all our research, Rick. So, but we're not going to stop, and you can bank on that.
All right, Mark. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I should be moving down to Port St. Lucie here in the next couple of weeks. When I get down there, I'll look you up. Maybe we'll get some coffee or something.
Yeah, man. I'm just down the road in Tequesta. Give me a call.
All right. Thanks again. Bye.
Have a good night. Thanks for having me, Rick.
Bye.
Thanks for being there, guys. Have a good night.
All right, folks. That was Mark Zaskey. I want to thank Mark for coming on again. I'm going to read some of your comments here real quick. Oh, y'all are talking amongst yourselves. Okay. Well, anyway, folks, until next time, let me get my information here. I've got the wrong thing going on here. Yep, there you go. Okay, folks, until next time, you all take it easy.